I was looking at the reading for today, and it starts off with ancient wisdom. I like that. Wisdom is good. Wisdom is something that's passed on from one generation to the next. And this is old wisdom. It's old wisdom that feels good. So that's not written down. Sorry. But when I saw that and I reflected on it for a moment, I felt I needed to share it. This is good stuff. This is good wisdom. Our reading for the day is from Gafney's translation of the book of Ruth, chapter 2, verses 1 through 16, chapter 4, verses 9 through 17. Now Naomi had a relative through her husband, a warrior-hearted man of worth, from the family of Amalek, and his name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain, behind someone in whose eyes I may find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go, my daughter." And she went, and came and gleaned in the field behind the reapers. As it happened, she happened upon the part of the field that belonged to Boaz, who was from Amalek's family. Then suddenly Boaz from Bethlehem, he said to the reapers, "God be with you." They answered, "God bless you." Then Boaz said to his boy stationed over the reapers, "To whom does this girl belong?" The boy stationed over the reapers answered, "She is the Moabite, the one who returned with Naomi from the country of Moab." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers." So she came, and she had been standing from the morning until now, only resting in the shelter a little. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Have you not heard, my daughter? Go not to glean in another field, neither leave this one. Thus you will cling to my girls. Keep your eyes on the field that is being reaped, and follow after them, the girls. Have I not commanded the boys not to touch you? When you thirst, go to the vessels and drink from what the boys have drawn." Then she fell on her face and bowed down to the ground and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your sight, that you would distinguish me as I am a foreigner?" And Boaz answered and said to her, "It has been told to me all that you have done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, and that you have forsaken your mother and father and your native land, and came to a people that you did not know before yesterday. May the Holy One of old reward your works, and may you have a full recompense from the Holy One, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." Then Ruth said, "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and have spoken to my heart to your slave woman, and I am not one of your slave women." Boaz said to her when it was time to eat, "Draw near and eat from this bread, and dip your piece in the vinegar." And she sat beside the reapers, and he handed her some roasted grain, and she ate and was satisfied, and she had some left over. When Ruth got up to glean, Boaz commanded his boy, saying, "She may even glean between the sheaves. Do not humiliate her. You must also pull out some for her from the bundles, and leave them for her to glean, and do not rebuke her." Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I am acquiring all that belongs to Amalek, and all that belongs to Chilion and Mahlon from the hand of Naomi. Also Ruth, the Moabite, the wife of Mahlon, and I am acquiring for myself as a wife to maintain the dead man's name on his inheritance, to reestablish the name of the deceased on his heritable property, that it may not be cut off from his kin and from the gate of his native place. Today you are witnesses." All the women and men who were at the gate, along with the elders, said, "We are witnesses. May the faithful God grant that the woman who is coming into your house be like Rachel and Leah, the two of them built upon the house of Israel. May you prosper in Ephrathah and establish a lineage in Bethlehem. And may your house, through the children that the fount of life will give you by this young woman, be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar gave the birth to for Judah. So Boaz took Ruth as his own for a wife. He came to her, and the source of life granted her a pregnancy, and she gave birth to a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the faithful God, who has not deprived you this day of next of kin, and may the child's name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a provider in your later years. For your daughter-in-law has given birth to him, she who loves you, she who is more to you than 7 sons." Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her bosom, and she fostered him. The neighbor women gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him for Obed. He became the father of Jesse, the father of David. The modern witness today is by Beverly Daniel Tatum from "Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria?" We all have a sphere of influence. Each of us needs to find our own source of courage so that we can begin to speak. There are many problems to address, and we cannot avoid them indefinitely. We cannot continue to be silent. We must begin to speak, knowing that words alone are insufficient. But I have seen that meaningful dialogue can lead to effective action. Change is possible. A word of God that is still speaking. Thanks be to God.
Will you pray with me? Merciful God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our help and our Redeemer. Amen. Here we are today, and it is a day with many reasons to celebrate, many reasons to give thanks and to have joy. Today is Father's Day, and I'll say Father's Day is not an official church holiday. Trinity Sunday, yes. Pentecost Sunday, yes. Father's Day, not really. Many churches, however, make a big deal out of Mother's Day, but Father's Day always gets just a little more than a passing mention. There's a couple reasons for this. The third Sunday in June marks usually the end of school, the beginning of summer vacation. It means grad parties and maybe the kickoff of Vacation Bible School, as it does for us today. For years, Portland's Pride celebrations have been this weekend, and I know some churches in our conference have, canceled worship in their building every Sunday to hold worship there in the parade on that Sunday morning. This weekend, Pride has been moved this year till July, but this weekend is Juneteenth. And yesterday there was an amazing Juneteenth celebration up at Orenco Station. There will be more celebrations throughout this week, I'm sure. As it happens, today's message touches upon the themes of both freedom and fatherhood. So I'm going to try to cover all the bases. Last fall, our worship committee agreed to dedicate this year to studying this lectionary, a women's lectionary for the whole church, written by Wilda C. Gafney. A year of intentional listening to the voices of women and girls and the divine feminine in Scripture. I was wondering the other day if it was possible that some of the male-identifying folks in our midst, as supportive as they might be to this study, if maybe they've been feeling a little left out, even challenged or threatened by Gafney's critique of the patriarchy in the past and present history of the church, which is why this morning I wanted to take some time to talk about men and fathers and the powerful witness that they can have when, as a matter of faith, they choose to act as allies. As promised, this morning we continue our study of the book of Ruth. Last week we read that familiar passage, that wedding reading from Ruth chapter 1, where Ruth makes her vow to Naomi and says, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates me from you." We talked about how this speech was, as it's often shared in many a heterosexual wedding, it is in fact between two women. This beautiful speech. Well, the story moves on to tell of Ruth and Naomi's life together. And the biblical storyteller chronicles how Ruth cared for Naomi by taking the only job available to a husbandless woman, gleaning in the field of a man named Boaz. He is not just any farmer. Gafney notes that in chapter 2, verse 1, he's described as a relative through Naomi's husband, a warrior-hearted man of worth from the family of Elimelech. At the very end of the reading, at the end of the book, we learn how significant Boaz will be. That through him, Ruth conceives a child who will be named Obed, who will be the father of Jesse, who will be the father of David, who will one day defeat a lion, defeat a giant, be anointed king of Israel. A man from whom Jesus of Nazareth will be a descendant. If you wondered why the book of Ruth was included in the canon at all, this is why. It's about the genealogy of Christ. It's about the history of the people of Israel. Now, the keen liturgist, the keen listener might have noticed that I asked our liturgist, Perry, to only read chapter 2 and 4. And there was a skip there. Well, the decision was partly due to time. I didn't want to hold you here for a whole 45 minutes today. But the decision was also because I didn't want you to see him blush when we got to the steamy parts. In the traditional reading, the version of this story that's told in the storybook Bibles, story of Ruth and Boaz, is a romantic tale of second chances, of love that overcomes all obstacles. I get it. You got to keep it G-rated for the kids, right? There are not many stories of women, even fewer with a strong female lead in the Bible. So this story is told in that storybook Bible version, but when you read it, you see it's quite simplified. It's even sanitized. When we first meet Boaz, he is overseeing his workers in his fields. Gafney writes, "There's a lot going on in Boaz's fields in terms of gender and class and identity. It's being worked by women and men who, due to their social status relative to Boaz, are called girls and boys, very much in the way that some used to refer to grown men as houseboys, also evoking the racist practice of black women and men being called gal and boy, and in not just the South. In verse 9, the boys draw water, a caution against the stringent notions of strict gender roles for men and women. And curiously, there is no mention of slavery in Boaz's description. We understand that his workers are paid workers, but Ruth uses the language of slavery to describe herself and the other women in chapter 2, verse 13. There's something else going on here. In chapter 2, verse 9, Boaz tells his boys, "Don't touch Ruth." Now, he says nothing else about the other girls. And a charitable reading says that his girls are already off limits. But Ruth was a foreign woman, a woman who Israelites might have viewed as promiscuous or enticing. She was also hungry and poor and vulnerable. She may well have been easy prey without his intervention, which he knew, and begging the question of, were there other women who were not off limits in that culture, in that time, in that place? The fields have not always been a safe place for women. They are not even today. So there was danger here in that field. But there was also favor. Boaz is a good and diligent manager. He's present and attentive and kind and compassionate. Naomi hoped this might be the case. That's why she sent Ruth there to that field that day. But when Ruth finds that that is true, Naomi comes up with a plan. Chapter 3, seduction. In the interest of time, I did not have the liturgist read the whole portion, but I'll summarize it for you now. And if you'd like, you can pull out your pew Bible and turn to the book of Ruth, chapter 3, and go along with me on this journey. When Naomi learns of the way that Boaz has favored Ruth, allowed her to glean extra grain from his field, she recognizes that this man, Boaz, could serve as the kin redeemer that they are in need of. Now, a kin redeemer is an idea. It's the nearest adult male who bears responsibility for redeeming or buying back their hard-up kin from debt slavery and or avenging their blood in case they've been killed. This is a special category in Israelite law, a provision designed to protect land ownership and to keep that land in the family of the male inheritors. See, a woman without a male heir must marry another related man who will accept the debt or the responsibility for that land. This kinsman redeemer buys back the land and gets the woman or women in this case as part of the package deal. As a Moabite, Ruth would not necessarily understand this custom, but Naomi does. And she intuits from his past kindness that Boaz may be open to some such arrangement. And so she tells Ruth to bathe, dress in her nicest clothes, then go down to the threshing floor at night, wait till after Boaz has eaten dinner and maybe had a little wine, and then lie down at his feet and uncover his thigh. Now that is euphemistic language for probably exactly what you imagine it to mean. Now you know why I didn't ask the liturgist to read it. It sounds like one of those steamy period pieces. But Ruth agrees to do what Naomi asks. And yet Naomi feels the need to give her fairly explicit instructions. It makes you wonder how young Ruth really was. It makes you wonder how young she was when she was married to Naomi's deceased son. Child marriage was not unheard of at that time. Still is not. Well, this raises multiple issues for a contemporary reader. So Ruth is a stranger in a strange land, in a strange culture, a widow, poor and destitute, perhaps quite young. She is the definition of vulnerable. And Boaz, in contrast, has money and power. He is a male in this patriarchal culture. He's apparently much older. So you wonder, if she refuses or changes her mind, there's no assurance that his generosity and goodwill will continue when she goes back to gleaning the fields the next day. There's no guarantee that she'll be forever protected from the harassment of the male laborers. One wonders what choice she really has. There are many in our world who sadly do things that they don't want to do in order to survive. Now, this is a story that is beloved in the Christian canon, and I did a quick search, and there are a lot of very glowy Christian media movies of Ruth and Boaz's story. But given this power imbalance between these two people, it's hard to know whether Boaz was wooing Ruth or grooming her. After awakening to find Ruth there at his thigh, he says something to the effect of, "Who are you?" And then when she explains, he goes, says, well, let me see. There is another who's a closer kin. Let me see if he will take you. Let me see if he will take you first. Then he says, we'll lay back down for the night. There's a lot of thoughts about that. But early in the next morning, before anyone is awake, he sends her home, before she can be seen. And so you wonder. Now you want to assume the best, not the worst, but you wonder, was this an innocent overnight sleepover? Or was this the morning walk of shame? When Boaz sends her home, he doesn't send her home empty-handed. He gives her all of this grain. And you wonder, is this kindness? Is this payment? The traditional view is rather innocent, suggesting that nothing happened until the wedding day. Gafney has questions about that. But the power of the narrative is that it leaves it open to the interpretation of the reader. In the end, Boaz exemplifies both human and divine providence for Ruth and Naomi. He agrees to take Ruth as his wife, accepting Naomi's land and possibly debt. And then the two are married, and they conceive a child. And again, a child who the whole town calls Naomi's son, even though there is no blood shared between Naomi and the child. The child, Obed, is the product of Ruth, a Moabite stranger, and Boaz. If this is a love story, this is one of the strangest love stories I have ever read. There's no mention of love between Boaz and Ruth. There's no mention of the kind of father that Boaz was, or whether he was even present. As a biblical father to lift up on this Father's Day, Boaz wouldn't be my first choice. And yet here's a man who cared for a poor immigrant farm worker, a widow, and her widowed mother-in-law. No one asked him to or forced him to, but he extended financial support to her, to both of them, at his own personal cost. He wouldn't have had to marry Ruth to bed her if that's what he wanted, and yet he did marry her, and possibly again at some personal cost, both financial and possibly social costs. Any children who would have been conceived would have been mixed race, Israelite and Moabite. At the very least, she had been another man's wife, a man who's now dead. After the child is conceived, we hear nothing about him in this book. The rest of the narrative centers on Naomi and Ruth. Boaz is mentioned in genealogies all the way through to the New Testament, but his story is largely unknown. And yet, the actions that he took helped subvert the patriarchal system which had condemned these two women to poverty. There are a lot of fathers in the Bible. Some good, many bad. A lot of stories of all too human men who did both terrible and courageous things. Boaz may not be the perfect father type, but he is an example of how men can act as allies towards the women who are around them. He had compassion. He interrupted the racism and sexism that was present on the field that day. He demonstrated his solidarity through financial support. And he allowed himself to get entangled in this story, but did not take over their story. As I think about what this means in light of our life today, I realize that we are in a moment in our history when there is so much toxic masculinity. It is very hard to be a man, a father, and not absorb so much of that. And it's not just cultural, it's theological. It's rooted in and supported by how we read this book we call our Bible. How it's interpreted, not just for men, but for all genders. One of you shared with me a new TV series called Shining Happy People. It's a docu-series about the Duggars, that reality TV show, 19 Kids and Counting. Do you know this? Well, they're products of a kind of theological group called the Institute of Biblical Life Principles, run by a man named Bill Gothard in the 60s. It's an ultra-conservative Christian group, has a cult-like influence on certain evangelical communities, and it was something I knew as a child. Something that was very much present in the world where I grew up. But the docuseries does a wonderful job of sort of connecting the dots between some of the toxic ways that this theology is borne out in the world. One of the things is this graphic. There's this graphic with umbrellas, and there's an umbrella for God, and there's an umbrella for the church, and there's an umbrella for the father, an umbrella for the mother, an umbrella for the children. I guess the pets are somewhere at the bottom there. The idea is that as long as you stay under your umbrella, the authority of the umbrella above you, that you are protected. You're protected from evil, from the devil's attacks, and you're centered in God's love. I don't think they understand how umbrellas work, because of course the biggest umbrella would stop all of the rain. But in this culture, in this kind of theology of masculinity and fatherhood, women married young, and are treated like children. Virginity is prized and protected. Childbearing and motherhood is the primary goal every woman should aspire to. And every family, every father should have a quiver full of children. Authority is to be obeyed and never questioned. And of course, this creates all sorts of problems, all sorts of situations ripe for abuse. This ideal of male headship, rooted in scriptures, is also related to the very current debate in the Southern Baptist churches about the ordination of women. And again, I say, I'm proud to say the UCC ordained women beginning in 1853.
Amen.
That doesn't mean we've arrived, though. In a few days, our UCC General Synod will meet in Indianapolis, and there'll be a vote taken on whether we will elect our first female president and general minister of our denomination. Others have tried before and failed. Others who are very highly qualified. Just so we're clear, listening to the voices of women and girls does not mean that we must hate or denigrate men. It only means that we understand that mature men don't need to exercise power over women to be strong, warrior-hearted men.
Amen.
Men can be allies, supporting warrior-hearted women and girls too. I look around this room and I see men and fathers, people who are trying to do just that, who are trying to be faithful men, faithful fathers, faithful allies, though they may not use that word. Fathers who are simply trying to be better than their father was, to interrupt cycles, patterns that weren't helpful, that did harm. Many people have wonderful fathers, and it's a day to celebrate those. But not everyone does. Just as on every Mother's Day, we know that not every mother's relationship is an easy one. But there are people in this room who are trying to do their best, who accept and support their mothers and wives and daughters, as well as their sons, and LGBTQ children who, in this other culture, have often been turned out and made homeless to great pain and suffering. All people, not just men and fathers, are called to use our privilege and our power for the benefit of those who are vulnerable or marginalized, to be allies in solidarity with the oppressed. And not that anyone can ever claim to be an ally themselves. That's a title that can only be granted to you. You don't get to claim that for yourself. which is why we have to be so wary of performative allyship. And it's not easy. It's very easy to fall into that. But Beverly Tatum says, well, we all have a sphere of influence. Each of us needs to find our own sources of courage so that we can begin to speak. There are many problems to address. We cannot avoid them indefinitely. We cannot continue to be silent. We must begin to speak, knowing that words alone are insufficient. But know that change is possible. Today I give thanks for Boaz, this somewhat reluctant father, who nevertheless helped Ruth and Naomi survive and thrive with little Obed. They became a part of our historic family of faith. I give thanks for all who father faithfully, working to interrupt the harmful patterns of the past and heal the broken places and make a brighter future for the children of today and tomorrow. And I pray year after year we will learn how to be in solidarity with one another, caring for those on the margins, using our power and privilege to bring ever greater justice and joy and freedom. Let the church say.